With its pathetic 9% claim of the DIY hardware market and accruing $3 billion in losses, Masters Home Improvement stands as the greatest retail failure in Australian history. In its 5 short years of business, Masters would trade countless blows with industry titan Bunnings and famously lost every single bout. But what a lot of people don't know is that Masters was actually successful in making Bunnings bleed, on several occasions. So why then did the venture crash and burn? Turns out it's the same reason Bunnings dominates, but also why it might one day have its reign overthrown. August 2009. Woolworths Limited publishes a press release called Project Oxygen. In it, they outline their impending expansion into the retail hardware sector and their primary goal in doing so: to finish off their flailing foe Wesfarmers and destroy the only thing keeping them afloat: Bunnings. This was a declaration of war, and on this front it was that Woolworths prepared their death blow by sucking the oxygen out of their lifeline. Woolies initiated a joint venture with American hardware giant Lowe's, who would assist with operating this new Bunnings killer. The first step they took together was purchasing Danks, a wholesaler to hundreds of hardware stores, supplying them with timber, green life, and DIY hardware products. In one simple move, Woolworths knocked out the 3 pillars of the Bunnings offer, and they did it nearly overnight. With that came confidence so potent that it factored into naming their new enterprise. And so it was that Bunnings were the students, and the masters would teach them a lesson. But first they needed their classrooms, and in that endeavour came a problem. The average Bunnings at the time was about 8,000 square meters in size, not even including the 500 plus parking spaces needed. But Masters didn't want to be that size. They wanted to be bigger. A regular Masters would take up at least 13,000 square meters, nearly double that of Bunnings, and they ballooned to that size because of Woolworths' decision to stock white goods. For them, it wasn't enough for Masters to merely match the Bunnings offer. They had to exceed it. On paper, the increase in scope shouldn't have been a problem, but because Masters was already late to the hardware table, the plots of land suitable for such developments were taken. Bunnings had circumvented this problem in the preceding years by acquiring and rebranding their competitors' stores, but that wasn't an option for Masters. If they wanted to stick to their goal of 150 stores in half a decade, an average of 15 to 20 per year, they had to move quickly, and so sacrifices were made. The first of these can be seen with their first store in Braybrook, Victoria. Previously an abandoned car city, it wasn't exactly prime real estate. Some of their other sites were less than strategically located. This one in Mandurah, WA, was right near a Bunnings warehouse. I imagine though that there was some level of pride in these choices. Considering the latter problem especially, Woolworths likely expected disenfranchised Bunnings patrons would find their way over to Masters. Perhaps this approach was working, because Bunnings would end up hiring government lobbyists to oppose the construction of a Masters store in Geelong. They contended that the inclusion of white goods in their product catalogue excluded them from the hardware store label, so the land should be zoned differently and the building effort prevented. The lobbyists must have had some sway, because the Victorian Planning Minister would ultimately reject the rezoning application, stating its misalignment with the City of Greater Geelong's strategic direction. It was a flesh wound. 14 Masters stores were already under construction at the time, and another 10 had been approved. The altercation had proved one thing though: Bunnings was afraid. That realization fueled the Masters' resolve, and on September 1st, 2011, the battle began. The Masters method was clear from the moment you stepped into a store. Bright blues and whites replaced swampy greens and reds. Spotless concrete floors made that of Bunnings look barbaric. Small touches, like having splinter-preventing plastic wrap around timber boards, made the DIY experience more approachable. White goods from trusted brands were sometimes sold at a quarter of their recommended retail price, and if that weren't enough, Masters replicated their enemy's 10% price beating guarantee. Employees would proudly champion this, providing assistance at the press of a button, and with a guaranteed minimum of 100 hours training, you knew you were in good hands. Woolworths head Michael Luscombe quickly declared the launch a success. The numbers, however, told a different story. Per later trends, we can speculate that Masters lost about $100 million in their first year. But with that, it's not uncommon for new businesses to be unprofitable for their first few years. What's important is that they stick the landing conceptually, and according to Luscombe, that's exactly what Masters had done. The fact he was halfway out the door while saying this though casts a little bit of doubt over the assertion. 2013 would cast it further, with the chain achieving the lowest volume of sales in their sector, 6.6 million compared to the 84.2 million of Bunnings. Contributing to that, I imagine, was the fact that a large chunk of Masters stock came from their American suppliers through Lowe's, meaning you'd see summer gear sold in July and that of winter sold in December. The American influence, of course, also meant that firearms were sold alongside gun safes. Bunnings is known to stock both in regional areas, where vermin hunting fosters demand for them, but in urban centres, where the majority of Masters stores were located, their sale was strange and slightly alarming. Santa gifted Masters a further 157 million in losses for Christmas in July, and then for Christmas in December, put them at the center of an $80 million recall for a faulty, potentially lethal kind of electrical wire. I guess they are on the naughty list. Masters was certainly done playing nice, as 2014 saw them and Bunnings battle it out on prices for the first and final time, with it all coming down to paint. Masters came out swinging, pricing a 4-litre tin of entry-level paint at $20 a pop and promising further price cuts in the future. Bunnings appeared to respond, slashing the price of their equivalent product from $33.50 to $17.50, a huge change, but one they claim to have done per seasonal trends rather than Masters' attack. Alas, the first casualty when war comes is the truth, and so it remains unknown if Masters had really made Bunnings budge. If you ask me though, I think by this point they were more embarrassed by their contemporary than intimidated. Not long before, Dulux had pulled their premium products from Masters, painting a picture of a sinking ship with its passengers jumping to the lifeboats below. And sinking the ship was. With 176 million more in losses for the year, not only had Masters lost the war they started, but on their own terms. 2015 was the beginning of the end, where Masters would stage their final stand. In the background of the backfiring price war, Masters had begun rolling out revised store layouts, but even that wouldn't be enough. Like a circling vulture, Bunnings would cunningly seal their enemy's fate by using the one thing they had in common. When Masters began selling a 27-litre esky, Bunnings released their own with 1 litre less capacity. Since the products weren't technically identical, Masters couldn't price beat the ever so slightly cheaper offer, and thus lost business. They fell victim to this ploy several more times, and in their ruthlessness, Bunnings would eliminate the only reason left that anyone would shop at Masters. With that, the vulture swooped in. The Masters had become the students. In early 2016, Woolworths announced the end of Masters operations. By December 11, all 63 stores, just under 100 short of the projected 150, were sold off or closed down. Today, Masters buildings stand converted to home coast shopping centres and even Bunnings warehouses. The Mandurah site, which saw Bunnings and Masters locked in a staring contest, saw the former move into the latter's building after decommissioning their own. But since that day in 2016, Australia has had time to digest all of this and come to conclusions about why it all happened. Mine, after reading about all of this, is simple. Masters didn't understand this country, and also, they were just a little bit weird. The latter sentiment comes mostly from the American influence over the business, which emerged predominantly in the workplace's culture. In the early days, Masters could afford to deliver on their promise of experienced, trained staff, but as years passed and losses grew, that became impossible. Cost-cutting necessitated the hiring of industry aliens, people who'd never worked in hardware before. Over time, Masters became populated with shop assistants rather than tradies, as one Reddit comment says. These shop assistants were micromanaged to such a degree that there were rules around how to park your car. And when staff became understandably jaded, they were forced into bizarre team bonding exercises. These included a Masters chant at the beginning of each day. Give me an N, give me an A, and so on. Judging by the fact I get secondhand embarrassment just thinking about that, I wouldn't say Masters made for a very flattering place to work, which would have done a number on employee turnover. But all of the decisions Masters made were underpinned by one piece of their strategic rationale that most agree was its downfall. Masters wanted to appeal to women. In the formative days of their venture, Woolworths and Lowe's became enamored with a statistic.
The female in the household actually is the one that makes the decisions.
They rationalized that, if true, women and their tastes were severely underrepresented in the day's hardware market. You can see how the Masters brand image emerged from this understanding. The bright and clean stores, the white goods, the McCafe coffees. Not only did this strategy completely stereotype how women like to shop, it also ignored the other half of that statistic. that men make the majority of purchases in hardware stores. With the direction that masters took, men felt alienated. Tradespeople, of whom men make up a majority, were also dissuaded from using the master's trade service. They simply had no reason to. So while lower prices might have won men over for a little while, the moment that advantage disappeared, so too did they, returning to the familiar and more gender-affirming offerings of Bunnings. Masters failed because it fundamentally misunderstood what to sell, how to sell it, and who it was selling to. Bunnings succeeded and continues to do so because it did. Oh so very well.